This video is a part of a series. If you haven't watched part 1, I'd advise you to do so before continuing on. Link is in the description. So last time on Grunbeld's bizarre adventure, the word dragon was said approximately 10 billion times, and our hero was captured by evil cartoon villain Abekasis for 4 years of his life with his pals Thing 1 and Thing 2, I mean Edvard and Sigurd. General Kirsten and his merry men free Grunbeld and the other captured slaves from the Tudor forces. Grunbeld is put under Kirsten's care, yada 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 yada. We now flash forward to 14 years later. Grunbeld has become a strong, giant knight and is now the master of a flame dragon lair, even being captain of his own heavy infantry who still fight Tudor to this day. He still uses the warhammer courtesy of Tony the Tiger, and is even now sporting a big dragon shield. An army of 20,000 is approaching the fire dragon lair compared to Grunbeld's own 3,000. We are reintroduced to adult versions of Edvard and Sigurd. Edvard's description is very basic, summing it up as, he's grown taller, but not as tall as Grunbeld, and has an eye patch and nice hair I guess. Whereas Sigurd, well, Fukami gives her the full works, so to speak. Sigurd is described as having taut muscles like a gazelle's, and I quote, her breast and bottom has filled out, giving her body slender, elegant curves. I'd say this level of description is unnecessarily sexualized, and is really more in depth of her own description compared to Edvard's. But hey, we get a Grunbeld penis description not too far off, so equality, right? The 20,000 men is led by Dougal, a Tudor commander who uses a battle axe as his weapon of choice, his plan being to keep, Grunbeld, that's a weird typo, isolated by fighting 500 men at once because Grunbeld is an absolute unit, making it hard for him to advance on the battlefield. Dougal found this advantageous in two ways. If Grunbeld decided to come forward away from the lair, that means the Tudor forces could ransack the tower, and Grunbeld would be too plodding and slow to do anything about it. But if he stayed, it would just give the Tudor forces more time to create siege positions on the lair itself. So then Edvard's Keikaku is revealed, and it was just to give Grunbeld an Uber, being led in a chariot by 8 war horses, so Grunbeld could quickly get to and from the field of fight. The Tudor forces, and especially Dougal, can't be very clever if they didn't think of the possibility that, yeah, the Flame Dragon Corps probably had a way of transporting Grunbeld, but whatever. Admittedly, I think it's a pretty decent setup of having so much engineering going into just transporting Grunbeld into the fight, and the descriptions even mentioning that the chariot itself had to be reinforced with iron is a good descriptor to highlight Grunbeld's massive physique. So then we get into the meat and potatoes of the big battle. The book mentions that Grunbeld leaped like a dragon. This was just meant to highlight how fast he got off his chariot straight into the battle itself, but we have to make the dragon relation for the billionth time. So then we get to an odd scene where Sigurd jumps off her horse to cut down some soldiers, as she prefers fighting on foot compared to mounted combat. Edvard notices this and jokes, "You like it from the front better than being on the top, huh?" This is really odd and hokey dialogue, especially in the middle of battle. I guess you can chalk it up to the Grunbeld Corps being very confident in winning the fight, but if Edvard and Sigurd are around the same age as Grunbeld, they'd be in their late 20s at this point. This seems like something high schoolers would say, and the oddly coy way that Edvard treats and also flip-flops off sex throughout the novel, but more on that later. He's even complete with a jerk, with Sigurd's face turning red after. We're just missing a slide whistle here, and then we'd be all set. So then we get some more brief battle descriptions of how Grunbeld fights. These descriptions are actually pretty decent, scattering soldiers like spider webs, walking over soldiers to crush them to death if they try to crawl away. It's actually pretty close of how we see Grunbeld when Guts encounters him, as this all-powerful, unmovable force, and he treats his enemies as such, like they were bugs. So then Grunbeld beats Dougal by smashing his warhammer against his face, and then the prisoners that the Grunbeld Corps taken get tortured in standard Berserk fashion I guess. Some have their hands and feet chopped off, whilst others are left suspended in an iron birdcage known as a gibbet to starve to death. I like how this paints even the Grunbeld Corps in a ruthless kind of light. It makes his sacrifice make a tad more sense. Grunbeld then meets back up with Benedict and Ludwig, and not much happens here. Benedict jokes to, Grunbeld? Why are there so many typos in this book? That he can't marry her because she's a priestess. And then we get some throwaway description of, people are biased of Grunbeld because he's so big, so he can't possibly know love. Benedict also pays attention to the bayonet that Grunbeld wraps around his warhammer and that it will change him. It's described she knows what a bayonet is from a chief priestess, who told her its origin. Okay, here's a warning now. Here's where the book completely falls off a cliff into the realm of terrible. It was pretty hokey and bad before, but oh god, you haven't seen anything yet. We cut back to Hakon, who, if you remember from the last part, was the Grand Duke who was also Edvard's father, who is in a hidden room from the castle where prisoners of special circumstance are being held. However, the novel takes supervillain Abekassis from the flashback and makes him look like a puppy compared to the ludicrous torture porn happening here. The book describes an innocent girl. I like how innocent was the adjective used here to further escalate the "look how evil this guy is," who was a prisoner of Hakon for seemingly no reason. 3 days prior, she had been bound hand and foot, pleading for her life, and what I'm about to read is word for word the description. It's gonna be real uncomfortable, and I can't believe this is real. Her tongue had been cut out and all her teeth removed, so she could only emit moans from the back of her throat. The Grand Duke Hakon was thrusting his cock into the girl's mouth. When he ejaculated into her throat, the girl choked and went into a coughing fit. Hakon struck her and shouted, "You idiot, swallow it." He picked up a pair of red-hot tongs that had been hung on the wall and hit her with them, gouging her flesh until the bone was visible. I'm not even going to make a joke or sarcastic comment here. This is honestly disgusting smut and adds nothing to the character of the scene. It's just here to paint Hakon as a villain with absolute no nuance at all. Escalate him as the most evil man in this novel by doing this. And the brilliant reason that Hakon is doing acts like these? Because he's jealous of Grunbeld, because Grunbeld is popular and strong, and he's not, so he wants to feel his bitterness on innocent women? This is not how you write a good villain. I know that this is a short novel, but you don't escalate from 0 to 100. There's no good explanation of the detail that Fukami puts into his character development. Even the worst of it, like Wild in the Golden Age, had some thought behind it, as mentioned last part, taking the apostle mantra, "do as thou wilt," to the most extreme. The only reason Fukami went to this extreme for Hakon was, he's the bad guy, so he do very bad thing, without any of the thought that Miura puts into his work. Oh, and it's also explained that Hakon was the one doing the murders in the Nord capacity that Kirsten was investigating in the prologue, which renders the prologue even more pointless, because it could have been revealed for the first time here, and nothing would have changed. Also, Fukami doesn't stop there. Hakon would also leave a woman alive and watch them die over a couple of days, while scraping off their flesh a little at a time with a bamboo spatula. Real glad that precious lines of a book are being used to describe the type of tool being used to scrape off one's flesh instead of fleshing, not a pun I swear, but it is a pun, the actual characters of the book. So then the supervillain leaves his dumb supervillain lair and then encounters a shadow creature waiting for him known as the Shadow Hands, which are basically the discount versions of the Bakiraka. The book even makes direct comparisons to the Kushan Bakiraka, a specialist assassin force who serve the Grand Duchy. This is another huge problem with the novel. Instead of introducing new and interesting concepts to the world of Berserk, it's just already established groups and settings but done in a shittier way. The Shadow Hands are just the Bakiraka again, but not enough time to go into their culture, why they are assassins in the first place, or have an interesting leader to follow, like Salat. If the book is making direct comparisons to the Bakiraka, then that's what I'm going to do. And the Shadow Hands just pale in comparison, as there's simply not enough time to go into them. Hell, there's even no illustrations by Miura of these guys, so all I have to go off is Fukami's vague descriptions that they wear animal pelts? The leader of the Shadow Hands, called Mateusz, I believe that's a Polish name, tells Hakon that they captured a spy who bears the seal of the other supervillain, Abekassis. Hakon informs Mateusz to not tell Grunbeld and Kirsten that they captured the spy because of reasons, I guess? The spy delivers a message from Abekassis to Hakon that Tudor planned to launch a full-scale attack and inform Hakon of how he can live after this happens. Drama, I guess? The next scene then introduces Edvard's mother, Grand Duchess Fulda, who is described as having an voluptuous figure, so she's thick pretty much. But Fukami also goes into weird enough detail of her facial flaws too, as being described as having a big mouth. The bridge of her nose is also too high, which makes her more approachable to people, I guess. There is a weird amount of detail describing Fulda's appearance in general. It doesn't seem relevant to any kind of character or world building, but kind of weirdly obsessive. I'm sounding like a broken record here, but Fukami's putting more detail and intention to the wrong areas here instead of fleshing out the main character of the book and the story around him maybe. But then there's another weird scene where Edvard notes that Fulda has gone into her bed chambers with Hakon, and I quote, Edvard assumed they weren't about to do you know what in the middle of the day, so he headed into Fulda's room to say hello. Is the language you know what in the perspective of Edvard or what? It's really odd tonal whiplash that the book is using this hush hush language about the possible idea of sex when we literally got torture porn descriptions not even 10 pages ago. And even if this were in the perspective of Edvard, he made that sex joke to Sigurd in the battle not long ago. Why would he be coy about not using the word sex? Well, there is a reason for this weird sexualized focus on Fulda. After Edvard encounters her and Hakon arguing, Fulda expresses interest in congratulating Grunbeld on his latest victory, and Edvard relates this to the many rumours on the street, and I quote, of Fulda wanting Grunbeld's seed? I'm surprised that the book used, and I'm using this word very loosely here, refined description of how Fulda wants to bang Grunbeld. Based on the iconic torture porn scene, I was expecting something more along the lines of Fulda wanted Grunbeld's hot dragon cum. We then get a scene where Kirsten returns to the dragon lair, as he does from time to time, and meets up with Sigurd to go visit Grunbeld whilst he's training. The training scene is actually pretty decent despite being brief, describing that Grunbeld swung iron poles weighing over 400 pounds as a part of his training. It's a decent way of describing that Grunbeld was a hardened warrior way before his sacrifice, and that all of the Neo band of the Hawk Apostle Generals were prodigies in their own right before they become demons, unlike Wild, who was a shriveled old man. Kirsten mentions the murders in the Nord capacity to Grunbeld and Sigurd, and that he has an idea of who is doing them. Why is this useless Hakon is a serial killer subplot in the book again? And then Edvard interrupts and says that the Grand Duchess is coming to congratulate Grunbeld on his victory, and so Grunbeld prepares a party. Kirsten and Grunbeld share a decent moment where a drunk Kirsten says he sees Grunbeld like a son. Granted, these two have barely shared any time together throughout the book, aside from subtext that Kirsten has been carrying for him when he was there for 14 years, but it's nice all the same. But then the romance subplot begins to rear its ugly head, with Edvard trying to confess his feelings for Sigurd, wanting to tell her she keeps getting prettier and prettier, as he's loved her since they were kids. This is going to bloom into an awkward love, square? So stay tuned. Kirsten then tells Grunbeld he brought Benedict with him, and Grunbeld rushes over to meet her where she's hanging out in some stables. Soldiers comment on how Grunbeld is like a bear who doesn't know what to do with a playful kitten when around Benedict, which is kind of a nice scene. It humanises Grunbeld slightly more so that his inevitable sacrifice could hold more weight. If only we could have more scenes like this in the novel, instead of a fetishy torture porn. There's even a cute scene drawn by Miura of Edvard and Sigurd laughing at Grunbeld's embarrassment around Benedict hanging off his neck. The scenes drawn by Miura in general actually have some decent story beats attached to them. It's almost like Miura just provided 10 pictures and then Fukami just built a story around the pictures. There's even some decent exchanges of how Edvard and Grunbeld, or maybe not Sigurd, feel like actual friends. Benedict thanks the pair for protecting Grunbeld, and Edvard then boasts about how Grunbeld is unbeatable, implying that Grunbeld doesn't really need their help. Benedict's soul-seeing power gets some interesting play here too, noting that Edvard's soul colour is green and yellow clashing together when he's talking about Grunbeld in high spirits. However, when Edvard puts himself down, comparing himself to a mouse squeaking in the fire dragon's ear, Benedict sees a blue will-o-wisp flicker behind the warm colours, attempting to foreshadow some darkness within Edvard's heart, I guess? Grunbeld even compliments Edvard in this exchange, saying he's the brain of a flame dragon, and if he wasn't there, the dragon might snap at his own tail. This is actually one of the few times in the book that the dragon comparison feels earned and fits within the context of a scene, that Grunbeld would act just like a mad animal if he didn't have his friends there to tame him. Oh yeah, but Sigurd barely does anything in this scene. She just laughs at Edvard's and Grunbeld's exchange, and then Benedict comments to herself that the three soul auras together are like a harmonious painting created slowly over time. Huh? This actually would feel sort of earned for Grunbeld and Edvard, but Sigurd's absolutely done nothing in this book so far. Kirsten then enters the scene and says he plans to have Benedict secularized so she can become a regular person instead of being a priestess. Kirsten says he wants Grunbeld and Benedict to marry each other because they act like lovebirds, even though this has barely been suggested so far. It feels way more like a sibling relationship. Hell, Benedict has called Grunbeld Big Brother multiple times throughout the book. But it gets better. Sigurd leaves the scene after witnessing this exchange about Grunbeld and Benedict being in love. I'm sure glad all of those scenes with Grunbeld and Sigurd together, so her liking him would make a lick of sense. Oh wait, there weren't any? Gotta make room for the torture porn, I guess. I mean, you just had a scene where Grunbeld and Edvard had a decent back and forth, despite being kind of shallow. If you're not gonna bother giving Sigurd this kind of attention too, I'm not gonna take your dumb love drama seriously. Brief scene with Grunbeld and Benedict, not much to say here. It's pretty much a repeat of their other scenes of Benedict saying fire dragon a billion times, and Grunbeld not understanding how Benedict doesn't fear such a ferocious beast such as himself. Kirsten was too drunk after hanging out with Grunbeld to see Benedict off, so Sigurd did it instead. When Benedict looked at Sigurd's aura, oh boy, we see a light shade of pink, which is the colour of love, referring to Grunbeld, who's also looking on to see Benedict off. Benedict then mutters to herself, "Even if I calm the dragon, I can't fight by his side," implying she's jealous of Sigurd gets to fight with Grunbeld, but she can't. So next we get a scene with the Legion of Doom, where the two supervillains Abegasis and Hakon meet up to hang out and talk about their torture porn techniques. I mean, the message that Abegasis' spy passed along, in which Hakon presents the spy's head to Abegasis, which Abegasis couldn't give less of a shit about. 20 mustache twirls later, Abegasis reveals that if Hakon hands over Grunbeld and the people of his land, then Tudor would give him a great fortune and add the House of Grant to the Tudor imperial family. When Hakon questions such a proposition, Abegasis pulls the typical "the people like Grunbeld better than you," just feeding into Hakon's inferiority complex. So then he agrees to the proposition. Abegasis' confidence that his 100,000 would be able to take on Grunbeld's 5,000, but tells Hakon to restrain Grunbeld anyway? Hakon asks the discount Bakiraka if they would be able to assassinate Grunbeld, and they straight up say they aren't sure if they can. So then Hakon plans to use Edvard to cause commotion within Grunbeld's inner circle. But, I mean, Edvard wouldn't suddenly heel turn like this and betray his friend for a father he barely knows. That would just be bad writing, so Fukami wouldn't do that. Right? Right? Oh no. Fulda finally shows up at the Dragon's Lair, and the book insists to tell us about the rumours which add nothing to the story at all. And I quote, "She couldn't be satisfied down there except with a ridiculously large penis," which somehow was connected to the rumour that she wanted Grunbeld's seed. Why does the reader need to know this? Why does everyone assume that Grunbeld has a big schlong? Is it because he's the fire dragon? Why is this in here? Briefly after Fulda's arrival, a messenger comes in and says the Grand Duke plans to bestow Sigurd a husband, and to marry Grunbeld off to Fulda? Edvard rightfully freaks out of his proposal, and everyone else is wondering what it could mean for a knight like Grunbeld to suddenly be bestowed royalty through this marriage. Just seems like he's repeating Griffith's whole arc in the Golden Age, but worse and way more rushed. If it feels like that I've missed a whole segment of a story, I haven't, I assure you. This marriage proposal for both Sigurd to some random noble and Grunbeld to Fulda literally comes out of nowhere as an extremely clumsy way for Edvard to turn against Grunbeld. But isn't Edvard the smart strategist? Surely he'd realise that his dad is up to something, right? So when the group arrives, supervillain Hakon explains that Sigurd's husband-to-be is a noble. It's so obvious that this plan is to cause the love triangle spat between the trio, but how did Hakon know that Edvard loved Sigurd and that Sigurd loved Grunbeld? Did he get the shadow hands to find out? Is Hakon reading a different book than I am? Because I'd love to read the part when there's any romantic chemistry here at all. Kirsten asks Sigurd to guard Benedict, who also went with the group, as Benedict is nervous in the presence of the castle because all the evil auras throw her off edge. So Benedict has confined herself in her room, but is lured out by assassins. When Benedict asks why the assassins want to kill her, they say they have no idea, and then Sigurd comes in the nick of time to finish them all off. And pay attention to this line here. Sigurd stabbed one assassin in the throat, and another in the belly. She dodged their daggers, as their blood splattered onto her. That's important, as their blood splattered onto her. Sigurd stays with Benedict after she kills the assassins, as Benedict is shaken. Benedict notes that Sigurd's fighting was beautiful, as despite being blind, she can feel the flow of her energy, and that she is jealous that she gets to fight by Grunbeld's side. So the two girls have a bonding session, where Sigurd also notes she is jealous that Benedict is the only one who can return Grunbeld to his humanity. We haven't seen such a thing in this book, as Grunbeld acts with as much charisma as a wooden plank in this novel, but whatever. Remember my comment earlier about the excerpt with Sigurd fighting the enemies? So here's a drawing by Miura accompanying these scenes. Where's the blood on Sigurd? It explicitly states that blood splashes onto her, but it's nowhere to be seen here. Sigurd and Benedict look awfully clean for people who were just involved in fighting assassins. Again, it's almost like Miura just provided these pictures without a story, and Fukami just made shit up on the fly. The scene cuts to Folder and Grunbeld, where she is trying to seduce Grunbeld in his bedchambers, and this whole scene is weirdly written erotica, even for this novel's standards. Grunbeld tries to refuse the advances at first, because she is Edvard's mother, but Folder persists. So then we are granted to some lovely descriptions of Grunbeld's penis, when Folder undresses him. Oh, that's what I call big. With his penis described as towering tall, and it was easily over twice the size of an average adult male. Grunbeld's characterization is 0 in this novel, but at least now I know he has a massive towering schlong. This is followed by even weirder dialogue by Folder saying, and I quote, "It's fine if we make it even bigger. A woman's genitals can even handle a baby passing through them?" This is such an odd descriptor. Why is being penetrated by Grunbeld's dragon dick being compared to childbirth? I have so many questions, and yet, I want none of them answered. So as Folder is servicing Grunbeld, the book reveals, in her own thoughts, that she was the one who orchestrated the assassination attempt on Benedict. Why? For some weird sex thing? Was it to make Grunbeld more obedient? He's pretty obedient already, and if Benedict got the axe, that would just make him go crazy and not follow your orders at all, no? Even if he didn't know it was you, I don't get Folder's plan here, and the book just inserted it in a throwaway line. So after the hot dragon sex, Grunbeld exits the room, and Edvard sees him just wearing a loincloth. When he confronts Folder about this in the guest room, Folder doesn't deny what just happened and said it was to protect the house. And here we have the birth of a new supervillain to join the Legion of Doom with Rebecca's knack on. Edvard throws a tantrum over Folder sleeping with Grunbeld with such brilliant dialogue as, "If protecting the family crest means you open your lair to anyone who asks, you might as well smear the thing with horse shit on the side of the road." Edvard strangles his mother in rage with a typical, "Don't you know what I've been through?" and accidentally kills her. May I remind you that Edvard's heel turn took place over the course of like 15 pages and was barely built up at all? It just happens. So then we cut back to Grunbeld, who is looking for Benedict. He runs into Sigurd, who tells him about Benedict's assassination attempt and that a guard has now been assigned to her, in which Grunbeld responds with running off to find Benedict, essentially ignoring Sigurd completely and getting irritated when she tries to explain what happened. He runs into Edvard on the way, where Edvard asks if he slept with his mother. Grunbeld basically ignores the question and continues on his hunt. Edvard approaches Sigurd after this, who is crying softly after being blown off by Grunbeld, and it's described that, as her hair blew in the night wind, Edvard looked anew at this woman, who's practically a little sister to him. Isn't he supposed to be in love with her in a romantic and not platonic way? I mean, Berserk isn't that shy about incest. considering that Adonis and Charlotte were going to eventually marry in Golden Age, but this is a choice description, and Fukami can't really seem to decide of a sibling or romantic relationship between the two. Sigurd explains to Edvard that her betrothed is the eldest son of a house called Olsen, and would be a fine wedding for damaged goods. Legitimate descriptor Fukami uses for her. This is such hokey and outright offensive language to describe a rape victim. Even if Sigurd is being derogatory about herself, Fukami's treatment of the female characters in this book has been awful and offensive thus far, apart from like Benedict, and I think that's it. So then the discount Shadow Hands find Edvard later and escort him to Hakon. Hakon is impressed that he actually killed Fulda, and that his plan is going smoothly. Now Edvard is worthy of being royalty because he showed ambition of killing his own mother. Hakon then gives a supervillain speech to Edvard about how he shouldn't need to live in Grunbeld's shadow and rise upon him. So, based on what the book has told us about his and Grunbeld's relationship, who have known each other for over a decade, saved each other's lives multiple times, and have been through many hardships, compared to a father who Edvard never really knew or even liked that much. Guess what happens? That's right, 20 odd pages of a hill turn which makes no sense. Hakon tells Edvard to use his blood-stained hands to take the Flame Dragon lair and become his successor. The book tries to explain that Edvard isn't being deceived or controlled, but backed into a corner and with no other option but to betray his friend. Hakon's script, as he puts it, wasn't even clever or believable that Edvard would go along with. It feels like a last-minute attempt by Fukami to try and incorporate a Griffith-type story to Edvard, for him to betray his closest friend, except, you know, Griffith was well written, and despite him doing terrible and demonic things, how he got to that point was believable and made the reader, you know, care for the whole scenario. Edvard's turn to supervillain isn't like Griffith's at all. It wasn't built up and was just an excuse for Fukami to add another supervillain to his torture porn roster. Grunbeld finds Benedict and she warns Grunbeld that the spirits are calling her to divine Grunbeld's future. Benedict then takes hallucinogens to better communicate with the gods, and then does a divine dance. During the vision, she sees Grunbeld's future, including a fierce battle, and the Baal Tau, and in the centre of it all, presumably Grunbeld's apostle form, was so overwhelming, it pulled Benedict out of her trance. She warns Grunbeld she saw the Fire Dragon lair in flames in the vision, which prompts Grunbeld to return to protect it. He runs into Sigurd, who Grunbeld then asks to look after Benedict in the upcoming battle. As if something happens to Benedict, then Grunbeld might lose control of the battlefield. Great plan there, eh, Folder? Benedict is reluctant about this at first, as is Sigurd, but then Sigurd vows to protect Benedict, as it would be the equivalent of fighting side by side with Grunbeld, in which Benedict agrees. We then get a real out-of-character line from Grunbeld saying to Sigurd before he leaves, "Sigurd, about your marriage, unless the man's a good match for you, I'll beat him to a pulp myself." How come boring cardboard Grunbeld is showing an ounce of character and charisma now? He didn't really care about Sigurd's marriage before. This is the kind of peppiness and spunk of a line I'd expect out of someone like Golden Age Guts. It doesn't fit with Grunbeld's characterization in this novel at all. So after Grunbeld leaves, the Discount Bakuraka and their leader, I can't even remember his name at this point, and I don't care to go back and look, tries to finish off Benedict and Sigurd. We then cut to supervillain Edvard and his lackeys invading the Temple of Extinguishment, where the priestesses reside, and this scene is unbelievable of how it throws all of Edvard's admittedly light characterization out of the window at this point. Remember, he's one of the children prisoners 14 years ago, but here he is giving the order, "Kill them all, they're a thorn in the Grand Duchy's side," with the descriptions, including the soldiers, forcing the priestesses to use their mouths, and rape them, and tormented them for sport. Among these was a 9-year-old girl, and screamed, "Mummy, Mummy, save everyone," as she was raped. This is ridiculously and horribly cartoonish, and to top it all off, Edvard comments, "This is rather fun, in its own way, witnessing and letting all these atrocities happen. Character assassination for an already weak character." Grunbeld runs into a squire, and says only himself and his elite cavalry of 1,000, is required for the impending battle, and then we cut to Sigurd, who's fighting the Shadow Hand leader, and just as he overpowers her, Edvard interrupts and stops the battle, who says they can hold Sigurd as hostage to Lord Grunbeld. Sigurd, just as shocked as Edvard turning supervillain like the reader is wondering why Edvard turned this way, and Edvard gives the incredibly well written line of, "Turns out I'm royalty after all, since that means my family's blood is rotten like sewage." Well, if he's gone full Saturday morning cartoon villain, he needs the corny dialogue to boot, eh? Edvard continues to go into crazy villain mode, spouting one-liners about all he wanted to do was please his father, complete with twisted smiles, as described by Fukami. This feels like a bad shonen villain and nothing out of Berserk. Ludwig, Benedict's wolf, then leaps through the window and attacks the Shadow Hand leader. This distraction gives Sigurd time to throw a fruit knife at Edvard's hand and escape with Benedict. He then tells his troops to kill them because if they reach Grunbeld, the whole hostage plan will fail. Grunbeld makes for the location for the battle, a hilly area, which is the same area described when he's first mentioned in the Berserk manga, where Bekassis and his troops begin their fight. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm getting really fed up with this novel now, so I'll just leave this beautifully drawn Miura illustration of the battle instead of going over the generic descriptions that Fukami describes. Grunbeld makes his way to Bekassis and manages to sever his arm with his warhammer. Bekassis runs away after this. Grunbeld decides to return to the Fire Dragon lair instead of pursuing Bekassis and sees two fallen figures, who are identified as Benedict and Sigurd. Oh, and also Ludwig, who was pelted with arrows and was already dead. I'm gonna be honest, I care more about the wolf than any other character in the story at this point. A dying Benedict informs Grunbeld that Edvard had betrayed them, and Grunbeld figures out that this was all a part of Hakon's, master plan. Edvard strolls in and presents Grunbeld, who is holding Benedict at this point, the head of Kirsten. No idea why he killed Kirsten, just to further his supervillain agenda, and Edvard's jealous that Grunbeld had a dad and he didn't. He's a literal different person at this point, and the book even highlights this in the descriptions of the character. However, this doesn't feel earned at all. I can't even be bothered to describe Edvard's own explanation to why he betrayed Grunbeld, when Grunbeld himself asks, it's the typical, "You took everything away from me," and at this point I just want the book to end. I'm so tired, you guys. So then Edvard's master plan was to distract Grunbeld long enough to fire a barrage of cannonballs at him. Grunbeld tanks 3 of these shots, whilst the other 3 miss, and he somehow survives. Look, I know this is Berserk, and astoundingly strong humans are common throughout the story, especially in Guts' case, but this is coming off the realm of ridiculous. Considering Guts' own cannon arm can usually finish off apostles themselves, human Grunbeld, despite having seabed blood, should not be able to tank 3 cannon shots. Edvard then impales Grunbeld with a lance, and then blames him for dragging Sigurd into it. Taking after his supervillain daddy, Edvard says, "Sigurd isn't dead yet. Maybe I can have sex with her one time before she goes," whilst smiling wildly. If there was a Worst Villain in Berserk award, literally everyone from this book would be nominated. So then Bekassis comes in and taunts Grunbeld and Edvard with the old "you two used to get along so well" shtick, in which Edvard responds that he never forgive Bekassis. Benedict, still dying by the way, tells Grunbeld to search for the Hawk of Light, and then the Balit begins to activate. Understandably, the Berserk audience knows what the God Hand looked like already, but I love how Fukami gives them half-assed descriptors compared to the in-depth descriptions we got on the torture porn and Grunbeld's dragon schlong. Some of the great descriptions for the God Hand include a beautiful half-naked woman with devil wings for Slan, and an insect-like man with a rattan physique for Conrad. How does Conrad look like an insect man? Did Fukami read Berserk? Am I stupid? He doesn't look like an insect, does he? So we get the typical sacrifice ceremony told for Grunbeld to become an apostle, where his sacrifices in this case would be Sigurd and Benedict. Wood opens a rift which shows Benedict barely breathing and Sigurd about to be raped by Edvard. The God Hand said if he accepts the sacrifice, he will find new battle with the Hawk, and grant Grunbeld the thrilling battles he requires. Grunbeld remembers Benedict's words about searching for the Hawk, and believes it is his fate to do so. So, he accepts the sacrifice, but not without another dragon comparison where Grunbeld utters, "I offer them for sacrifice, for I am a dragon." We get it, dude. So then the book just completely changes how the brands work. Here, they are just suddenly etched onto Edvard, Sigurd, and Benedict. Why is Edvard a sacrifice exactly? He wasn't mentioned by Void at all during the ceremony, and he's no longer one that Grunbeld cares for. The brands just don't appear on the body. Void distributes them. This isn't even a nitpick. It's been pre-established throughout the series, and come on Fukami, Void distributing the brands to the Band of the Hawk is one of the most iconic scenes in Berserk. How did you fuck this up? If it was for dramatic tension of them just suddenly appearing on the body, then I'm sorry, but it just isn't working. So Grunbeld is now in his dragon form and immediately bites Edvard in half and throws him on the ground, which kills him. Grunbeld then proceeds to go on his rampage against the army, but not before killing Benedict and Sigurd. And here's the dumb part. Benedict and Sigurd embrace the sacrifice. They both calmly look up at Grunbeld as they vanish in the wave of hellfire, with Grunbeld thinking to himself, "Both of you can live within me." This is just ridiculous. Past sympathetic apostles such as Rosine were sympathetic because of their actions which led to them being apostles, not what they did once they were one, and even then, Rosine had the sympathy of being a poor child being strung along by fate. A sacrifice being accepting of their fate is totally fucked up and doesn't match Berserk at all, considering they are now doomed to the vortex of souls for eternity, and seems to be Fukami's way of trying to paint Grunbeld as some kind of hero, when he doesn't deserve such at all. Grunbeld continues his attack on the army, including killing the Shadow Hands leader. Oh, I forgot about this guy. And he catches up to Abekassis. He tortures him slowly by biting off pieces of him and then setting him on fire. I actually think it's a decent idea of Abekassis getting his dues in this slow and painful way, and him being the last main villain, so to speak, that Grunbeld has to face. It's almost like he should have been the main villain of the story, instead of shoving Hakon and Bally Hill turned Edvard in there. Speaking of Hakon, the story ends with him waiting in Nord capacity on his throne, waiting for Edvard. He hears rumbling approaching, which is Grunbeld off to finish the job. And finally, this is where it ends. I'm gonna be honest guys, I'm too tired to even give closing thoughts. There were some glimmers of good parts in here, like Benedict, and Grunbeld's and Edvard's report early on in the book, but the rest of it veers on terrible fanfiction and torture porn, and it doesn't really deserve to be part of the Berserk canon, but seriously, I thank you for going on this journey with me, and I'm sorry if I petered out by the end there. I was really getting fed up of this novel by the end, but now finally, I can return doing what I love, talking about the good in Berserk. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.